360 ships fired at once, and the Endurance did not die. High Commander Vethdrawl watched the tactical display bloom red, then watched the red stop spreading. 40 of his ships were gone. The number should have kept climbing. It didn't. His targeting officer's voice cracked over the comm. "Sir, the human vessel is reading our formation changes before we make them." "That's not possible," Vethdrawl said. "I know, sir." The bridge lights of the Sovereign Wrath buzzed faintly, a high electrical hum that the crew had stopped noticing years ago and noticed now. Vethdrawl's neural crest flushed violet along its ridge. The color his officers had learned meant "do not speak to me." On the display, one small icon sat in the center of his entire fleet, untouched, still firing. It was called the Endurance. It was 187 years old. It had no business being anywhere near this fight, let alone winning it. Vethdrawl had studied Terran naval doctrine for 11 campaigns. He had broken 3 human battle groups in the last 2 years alone. He understood their ships the way a butcher understands cuts of meat, cleanly, without sentiment, without surprise. This one refused to be understood. "Pull the forward wing back," he said. "Now." Nobody answered. He turned. His tactical officer was staring at the readout with both sets of eyelids open at once, which the Keth only did when something had stopped making sense. 600 kilometers away, on a ship the Terran Navy had classified as their single most dangerous asset for the last 93 years, Captain Marana Calder gripped the edge of her command chair and said nothing at all. She didn't need to. The ship was already doing what it did. 3 hours earlier, 3 hours before any of this, in a building that smelled of recycled air and cold metal, Subdirector Valdris Corveth was still trying to make a single file make sense. She had read it 14 times. The cracked edge of her data tablet caught the overhead light every time she shifted it, a thin white line across the screen that had been there since she dropped the tablet 2 years ago, back when the file still made sense. It didn't anymore. The numbers refused to sit still in her head. Threat level Omega, assigned 93 years ago. Vessel age at time of classification, 94 years. Valdris tapped her third finger against her thumb, twice, the tick she'd had since she was young and had never managed to lose. The Terran Navy did not hand out its highest threat designation to old ships. They handed it to new ones, carriers with fresh reactors, cruisers still smelling of factory sealant. Nobody classified a 94-year-old hull as their most dangerous weapon and then kept flying it for another 93 years without retiring it. Unless the file was wrong. Files were never wrong. That was the rule the Directorate had been built on. If it was in the file, it was true. If it wasn't in the file, it didn't exist. The Endurance existed in the file, and the file made no sense. You should know now, before the fleets meet, before the numbers stop working, that this ship had already decided how the story ends. Stay with me while I tell you why. Analyst Vethkor leaned over her shoulder, crest twitching. "Still on the old ship." "It's not old," Valdris said. "It's 187 years old, and it has been designated our most dangerous target for 93 of them. That's not old. That's something else." "Something else like what?" She didn't answer because she didn't know, and not knowing was the entire problem. 12 years she had spent studying human military behavior, every doctrine shift, every procurement scandal, every quiet reclassification buried 4 pages into a supply manifest. She had built her career on the belief that humans, whatever else they were readable. You watched what they kept and what they threw away, and you understood them. The Endurance had been rebuilt 6 times. 6 different weapons arrays, 6 different eras of technology, bolted onto the same aging frame like nobody had ever thrown anything away in 187 years. By any reasonable measure, it should not have been able to fly, let alone fight. Senior Coordinator Morath dropped a stack of tablets on her desk with more force than the task required. "Anything. I've found that the Endurance has had its weapons array replaced 6 times, Valdris said. Each replacement used incompatible technology from a different decade. By every principle of systems engineering, the ship should suffer catastrophic failure just running its own reactor. Morath blinked, both lids at once. Does it? No, Valdris set the tablet down, cracked edge facing the lamp. It flies. Records Clarkson, silent until now, spoke without looking up from his console. There's a rumor in the fleet logs, nothing confirmed. The crew calls it the chorus. No one will say what it means. Valdris wrote the word down. She underlined it twice. Somewhere past the Directorate's outer wall, 17 intelligence contacts inside the Terran Navy. Sources she had cultivated over a decade. Sources who owed her favors. Sources who owed her nothing but talked anyway, were about to tell her, one after another, the same 3 words. I don't know. No one knew why the ship existed. No one knew what it was for. No one, apparently, had ever been cleared to ask. That should have been the end of the investigation. Instead, it was the beginning of the only file in 12 years that Valdris could not close. The declaration came 4 days later, and it came without warning, the way declarations from the Keth sovereignty always did. High Commander Vethral's voice went out across every Terran border relay at once, flat and certain, 43 campaigns of certainty behind it. The sovereignty considers the Kepler's drift jump corridor contested territory. We will take it within the week. 400 ships moved into formation behind him within the hour. Vethral had never lost a campaign. He did not intend to start against a species that built its most feared weapon out of spare parts and stubbornness. He read the Terran deployment order twice before he believed it. 1 ship. Not a fleet, not a defensive line. 1 ship, sent alone to hold a corridor against 400, and the ship's name meant nothing to him yet. A string of letters and numbers, TSS-001, filed under a designation his intelligence division hadn't flagged as significant. His crest flushed violet for the first time in months, not from anger. From the small, cold shape of a question he couldn't answer. Why would a species that valued its soldiers send exactly one to die? Unless they didn't expect it to. Valdris's 17th contact source answered on the 3rd try, his voice thin through a scrambled relay. I don't know, he said, before she'd finished the question. Subdirector, I've served in 3 fleet postings. Nobody assigned to the Endurance talks about it once they've served. Not bragging, not complaining, nothing. It's like the ship erases the subject from their mouths. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She closed the line and looked at the other 16 names on her list, each one already crossed out in the same red she'd used for the last 3 days. 17 people who had spent careers inside Terran military intelligence, and not one of them could tell her why a ship built from a century of rejected ideas held their highest threat rating. She wrote a single line at the bottom of the file. Either every one of these sources is lying in the same way, or none of them actually know. The second option frightened her more. 400 ships crossing open space made a very specific kind of silence on a bridge. Not quiet, exactly, but a held breath stretched across 40 officers who all knew better than to speak first. High Commander Vethral stood at the center of it with his hands folded behind 2 of his forearms, reading the same intelligence summary his tactical officer had handed him an hour ago. Terran deployment, TSS-001 Endurance, single vessel, Kepler's Drift System Center, no escort, no support fleet. He set the tablet down, without looking at it again. Get me the Directorate liaison, he said. The analyst, Corvath. His communications officer hesitated, a small thing, a half-second delay that on any other day Vethral wouldn't have noticed. Sir, she's civilian intelligence. She has no operational. She has spent 12 years reading humans, and I have spent 43 campaigns beating them. I want her opinion before I want my own. That was the sentence that would end up in 3 separate after-action reports, though none of the officers writing them understood yet why it mattered. Valdris arrived aboard the Sovereign Wrath 11 hours later, and the first thing she noticed was that Vethdrawl did not offer her a seat. She stood in front of a tactical display showing 400 Keth ships arranged in perfect formation against one small human icon at the corridor's center, and she felt her third finger find her thumb before she could stop it. "Explain this to me," Vethdrawl said. "No greeting, no rank courtesy, just the question direct as a blade." "I can't. You have 12 years of files on this species." "I have 12 years of files that make sense," Valdris said. "This ship isn't in them. Not really. It exists in a classification record and nowhere else. 93 years at their highest threat designation, and not one of my sources, 17 of them, inside their own navy, can tell me what it actually does." Vethdrawl's crest flushed violet along its ridge, the color she'd learned to read as controlled alarm rather than anger. It was, she thought, the closest thing to honesty a Keth commander was capable of showing a civilian analyst. "Then tell me what you believe," he said. "Not what the file says, what you believe." She looked at the display a long moment before she answered. "I believe humans don't throw things away. I believe every idea they've ever had that was too dangerous to name still exists somewhere, and I believe some of my sources aren't lying to me. I believe they genuinely don't know what's on that ship, because the people who do know never come home to tell anyone. That's not intelligence, that's a guess. It's the only guess that fits every fact I have." Vethdrawl said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, almost to himself, "One ship, against 400, and they sent it anyway." He didn't ask the next question aloud. Valdris heard it regardless, in the stillness that followed. "What do they know that I don't?" 3 days and one jump corridor away, Captain Marana Calder stood on the Endurance's bridge and watched the star charts update in real time as her ship crossed into Kepler's drift. The bridge smelled the way it always did, hot metal, recycled air, and underneath it something like ozone that never quite went away no matter how many filtration cycles the engineers ran. Officer Tors had been quiet for the last 4 hours, which for Tors was its own kind of alarm. "Captain," he said finally, 400 ships." "I've seen the numbers, Tors." "I'm not asking about the numbers." He turned from his console. He was young, younger than half the crew, and he had the particular nervous energy of someone who had trained for this exact moment and still didn't believe it was happening. "I'm asking why it's just us. Why isn't there a fleet behind us? Why isn't there anyone behind us?" Marana didn't answer right away. She reached for the mug at her elbow instead, lukewarm coffee she'd poured 2 hours ago and hadn't finished, and drank a mouthful she didn't taste. It was the kind of small, ordinary motion that meant nothing to anyone watching and everything to her. A habit older than her command, older than half the crew's service records combined. "The Endurance has never lost a battle," she said, setting the mug down. "Not once in 187 years. There's a reason for that, Tors, and it's not luck, and it's not that nobody's ever come at us with real numbers before. Some of them have." "Then what is it?" She looked at him, and for a moment something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile. "You'll see it before I can explain it. Everybody does." Below decks, in a maintenance corridor that hadn't been redesigned since before Tor's grandparents were born, Chief Engineer Dax ran a hand along a conduit housing that mixed 3 different generations of Terran engineering in the same 20 centimeters of wall. New alloy grafted to old wiring feeding new relays. None of it should have worked together. All of it did. "She's warming up," Dax said, to no one and everyone, the way engineers talked to their ships when they thought nobody important was listening. "Feel that?" The deck plating hummed, low and steady, a frequency that had no official name in any Navy manual because the system producing it had no official name either. Somewhere above them, 400 ships were closing the distance, certain of the math, certain of the outcome. They had no idea they were about to become the latest chapter in something that had been quietly practicing for 187 years, and had never once, in all that time, needed to lose to learn something new. "Sir," Vethral's tactical officer didn't wait for permission this time. The human vessel just answered our surrender demand. And they declined, sir, in 11 words. On the Endurance's bridge, Marana Calder set the comm down without ceremony. Around her, the crew held their stations, and the star charts showed 400 Keth ships arranged in a slow, deliberate crescent, closing. "Helm," she said, "hold position. Let them come to us." Tor's hands hovered over his console. "Captain, that's the plan, Tors. It's always been the plan." 40 ships broke from the Keth formation first, a probing strike, the kind of opening move Vethdrawl had used in 11 campaigns and never once needed to reconsider. He watched them accelerate toward the single human icon at the corridor's center and felt no particular concern. 40 ships against one was not a battle. It was an execution with extra steps. "Hold," Marana said, watching the same 40 ships close on her display. "Hold." The first Keth weapon's fire lit up 30 seconds out. "Hold." At 20 seconds, Yara's hands were already moving across her console, faster than the order that hadn't come yet. Now. The Endurance fired from systems that officially did not exist. A resonance array the Navy had rejected 60 years ago tore through the lead Keth cruiser's shields like they were tissue. A gravitational shear weapon, abandoned decades earlier for drawing too much power to be practical, folded a second ship in on itself. A third vanished mid-turn, caught in a phase displacement field nobody in 400 years of Keth engineering had ever theorized, let alone built a countermeasure for. "Report," Vethdrawl said, voice flat. 29 of 40 destroyed, sir. 4 minutes elapsed. His crest flushed violet down its full ridge. That is not possible with a single vessel's weapon loadout. "No, sir," his tactical officer said. "It isn't." Below decks, Dax kept both hands on the housing that fed power through 3 incompatible generations of Terran engineering, feeling it hum against his palm like something alive and getting warmer. "She's not just firing," he said. "She's learning while she fires. Watch the targeting solutions. Every shot's adjusting off the last one faster than any crew could input it." The junior engineer beside him, a woman named Ilio who'd been aboard 6 months and had never seen full engagement before, stared at the readouts with something close to fear. Nobody designed that. "No," Dax agreed. "Nobody did." Vethdrawl ordered the full fleet forward, 360 ships, every weapon the Keth sovereignty had ever built, converging on a single point in space that refused to behave like a target. On the Endurance, the lights flickered once, and the deck's low hum shifted into something with a different rhythm entirely, something that made Tor's teeth ache faintly in his jaw. Yara's hands moved across 3 consoles at once, not because she'd trained for it, but because, as she'd tell Dax afterward, unable to fully explain it, it had stopped feeling like 3 separate decisions. "The chorus," Marana said quietly, to no one, watching the tactical display fold 360 individual threats into a single problem the ship was already solving. The Endurance fought like a concept, not a ship. Every shot did 2 jobs at once, offense and defense braided into a single motion. Where a Keth formation shifted, the Endurance had already accounted for the shift before it finished. Vethdrawl changed tactics 3 separate times, each one a maneuver that had broken 3 separate human fleets in his career, and each time the ship on his display adjusted a half-second before the maneuver landed, as if it had already lived through this exact fight before and simply remembered how it ended. "It was always 1 step ahead," his tactical officer said, quiet with something that wasn't quite fear yet but was close. "Not 2 steps, not 10. 1, like it's learning in real time." Vethdrawl said nothing. He was watching his fleet's numbers fall in a curve that had no precedent in any battle he had ever fought or studied, and for the first time in 43 campaigns, he did not know what the next 5 minutes would look like. "You should sit with that for a second, because it's the part that took me longest to understand too. A ship built from a century of ideas its own navy had once called failures was now, in real time, fighting an entire modern fleet to a standstill, and doing it by remembering, all at once, everything it had ever been. On the bridge, Tors finally spoke, not a question this time, but something closer to a realization landing all at once. "It's not the weapons," he said. "It was never just the weapons. It's everyone who ever served on her, every fix, every worker, and every system somebody bolted on because throwing it away felt wrong. It's all still here." Marana didn't look away from the display. "I told you that you'd see it before I could explain it." Yara, hands still moving, spoke without turning her head, the first words she'd offered since the engagement began, and the first time in the entire voyage anyone had heard her say more than a status call-out. "It doesn't feel like I'm flying her anymore," she said. "It feels like she already knows where we're going, and I'm just confirming it." Nobody answered that. Nobody needed to. Below, in the corridor thick with 3 generations of engineering that should never have worked together, and had never once failed to, Dax watched the readouts climb into territory no manual had a name for, and understood, with the particular clarity of a man watching a thing he loved do something he still didn't fully understand, that the endurance was not simply winning. She was remembering how. The number that finally broke through Vethdrawl's certainty wasn't a number at all. It was silence, the sudden absence of return, fire from a sector that should have still been screaming with it. "Report," he said. His tactical officer didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had lost the flat professional calm Vethdrawl had trained into every officer under his command. "Sir, we've lost more than half the assault wave. The human vessel hasn't stopped adjusting since engagement began. It isn't fighting 360 ships anymore. It's fighting them like they're one ship it already knows how to beat." Vethdrawl said nothing. He watched the tactical display fold and refold, his fleet's formation collapsing not from panic, but from a simpler, colder problem. Every countermeasure his officers tried had already been accounted for, as if the Endurance had fought this exact battle before, on some other day, against some other version of him, and simply remembered the ending. Below decks, Dax finally had a name for what he was watching, and he gave it to Ilio in 4 words. "It's not one system," he said. "It's 187 years of systems that never got thrown away, all of them talking to each other at once. Every rejected prototype, every patch somebody made because scrapping the part felt like losing something. None of it was ever designed to work together. It just did, eventually, on its own." Ilio stared at the readouts climbing past, anything the manuals had names for. "That's not engineering." "No," Dax agreed. "It's memory." On the bridge, Marana reached for the mug at her elbow out of pure habit and found it empty. She didn't refill it. She just held it a moment, turning it once in her hand, the way she always did without noticing she was doing it. The same small motion she'd made 100 times on 100 quieter days, when nothing at all was happening, and the Endurance was simply humming along beneath her boots like it always did. Tors watched her do it, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, felt something in his chest settle. Then the display changed. "Sir," Vethdral's tactical officer's voice again, smaller now. "The Terran vessel has stopped advancing its firing solutions. It's holding position." Vethdrawl looked at the numbers. Nearly half his fleet was gone or crippled. The rest hung in a formation that no longer resembled a formation at all, just ships scattered wide, waiting for orders that made sense. He understood, in that moment, what he was actually fighting. Not a ship, not a weapon. A philosophy poured into one hull and left to accumulate, year after year, refusal after refusal to let a single hard-won idea go to waste. Humanity hadn't built something new to beat him. They had kept everything they'd ever learned and handed it forward, crew to crew, decade to decade, until the ship itself had learned how to fight the way a species learns how to survive, slowly, stubbornly, and without ever once forgetting. We did not lose to a ship today, he thought, and the sentence arrived whole, already formed, already true. We lost to 187 years of practice. "Fall back," he said. His voice was steady. It was the only thing he had left that still was. "Fall back to the jump point, all ships." No one questioned the order. No one dared. Silence settled over the Endurance's bridge the way it always did after an engagement ended. Not relief, not triumph, just the low hum of the ship easing itself back down from wherever it had been. Yara's hands finally stilled on her console. She looked at them like they belonged to someone else. "Captain," Tors said quietly, "what just happened?" Marana set the empty mug down. "What always happens," she said. She remembered. That was all the explanation anyone on that bridge would ever get. And somehow, watching Yara's hands slowly stop shaking, it was enough. Here's the part I still think about, more than the battle itself. 3 days later, in the Keth Council chamber, High Commander Vethdrawl sat alone with a blank report screen for longer than he had sat with anything in his career. When he finally wrote, he wrote slowly, and he did not revise a single word. The final paragraph read, "We did not lose to a ship today. We lost to 187 years of practice." He filed it without a title. There was nothing else to call it. Back at the Directorate, Subdirector Valdris Corveth read the battle report twice. Then she opened the technical analysis that followed it, 40 pages from her own division, concluding with the most honest sentence any of her analysts had ever put their name to. "We cannot fully account for the mechanisms by which the TSS-001 achieved these results." She set the analysis down beside her tablet, the cracked edge catching the lamp the way it always did. Analyst Vethkor leaned over, crest twitching with the same nervous energy he always carried. "So we still don't know what it is." "We know exactly what it is," Valdris said. "We just don't have a file category for it." She tapped her third finger against her thumb once, and this time it wasn't confusion. "Humans don't throw things away, Core. They keep them, they fix them, they pass them down to whoever comes next, and none of it ever fully leaves. The endurance isn't their oldest asset, it's their deepest one. That's not a weapon, that's a species describing itself in metal." Senior Coordinator Morath, listening from the doorway, said nothing for once. There was nothing left to add. 41 days later, a ceasefire was signed in a neutral station near the border, and the Keth negotiator across the table asked Terran Ambassador Cole a question that had clearly been sitting with him the whole voyage there. "How old will it be before you retire it?" Cole considered the question with the mild, unhurried patience humans seem to specialize in. "Our projections suggest at least another 60 years. And what will it be capable of by then?" "We're not sure," Cole said. "Neither is it." The Keth negotiator did not ask another question. Valdris kept the cracked tablet on her desk long after the file was formally closed. She never requested a replacement, though the Directorate offered her a new one twice. She told herself it was habit. She knew, by then, it was something closer to understanding. She set the tablet down one last time before locking the file, cracked edge facing her desk lamp. The thin white line catching the light exactly the way it had 3 hours into the investigation that had started all of this, back when the file still made no sense. It looked older than it was, like it had been accumulating too. She understood now why the humans kept things. Far across the border, in a berth built to hold a ship that should not, by any reasonable measure, still be able to fly, the TSS-001 Endurance powered down to standby, its hull humming faintly at a frequency no manual had ever named, patient, unhurried, and entirely undamaged by anything 360 ships had thrown at it. The Endurance continued to serve. It always did.